This video is a tour through a plugin for TiddlyWiki5 to manage Mermaid.JS diagrams and code. I'll open up the hosted plugin site from the GitHub repo. The motivation for this plugin is similar to TiddlyWiki. The idea of Markdown being to allow a nicely rendered output from easy and self-descriptive syntax. In TiddlyWiki, tiddlers are a simple output display of the underlying wiki text syntax. Mermaid.JS extends this concept to a variety of diagrams. Here, a flowchart, a very simple one. This plugin wraps the Mermaid Live Editor and some of its outputs to make it easy to edit and maintain Mermaid code in your wiki, while also displaying the rendered output, all within a very, very lightweight implementation. To situate this plugin, I first want to highlight two alternatives for managing Mermaid.js diagrams. The first is not to use a plugin at all, but to use the Mermaid Live Editor directly. This Live Editor provides a nice side-by-side experience and lots of options for saving or viewing output. Here I will edit the diagram, and you can see it will change and update the display. The output diagram can be opened as an SVG file, for example, and these buttons below make it easy to copy Markdown or copy other references to the diagram code, the underlying code of the diagram. This could be a workflow, but as I approached managing my diagrams and code this way, I did find it a bit cumbersome to manage opening, editing, and maintaining code, configuration content, and output diagrams all separately. There were several different parallel items that I needed to save and keep in sync with one another. It's always a good idea to keep your code on hand, as that is the source of truth for the diagram that is eventually rendered. And so this plugin really strives to simplify this workflow. It's not moving away from Mermaid Live so much as it is making it easier to integrate into TiddlyWiki. Another possible route to take would be to install the Mermaid.js code base completely in your TiddlyWiki. So E. Furlan on GitHub has posted and made available a plugin that comes from a few different sources. I had previously explored those sources. They were difficult to install and not actively maintained. And so when I was working with that code base, I ran into a few issues and decided it was not going to work for my workflow. This is a major step forward to help with that. And essentially the idea here is to take the full JavaScript library for rendering from the syntax, the Mermaid syntax, and to make that available inside of TiddlyWiki itself. So tiddlers contain the Mermaid syntax directly. There's a separate content type for identifying how these are to be parsed, and you can maintain and update this content, and it will update the rendered output directly. So this is a quick and convenient plugin for doing that. A couple of items or drawbacks to using this approach. I don't know if this is necessarily true of this new plugin as well, but I know one issue in the broader TiddlyWiki universe is interactions between different plugins, and that is one that I ran into when I was rendering diagrams from this or from a predecessor plugin. And the Stroll, so 2-story river format, did occasionally have some bugs in the rendering of those. and it becomes difficult to troubleshoot when you're dealing with an entire JavaScript library. The other downside is having the entire JavaScript library. That plugin is over a megabyte in size, which may just be a little bit heavy if you're looking to do some simple or lightweight diagrams, or for just quick and easy use. But this does provide you the most control and just overall customizability. It's probably the most assured, and a very key aspect of this is you have the code base inside of your wiki, so you can take it offline. It provides you a little bit more flexibility from that angle. Whereas the Mermaid Live Editor, of course, relies on an internet connection, and so does this plugin. This plugin is only 18 kilobytes in size, and that is because it relies on the Mermaid Live engine to render everything that comes out of it. We are really just maintaining the code and configuration within TiddlyWiki, and then referring everything outside of the wiki itself into the internet. So the suggested workflow for working with this plugin centers on the Mermaid editor. I will present a diagram, some syntax here. The theme can be selected from this dropdown. Let's stick with a base theme, or maybe a default theme. And from there, then you can take and save tiddlers from the output. The tiddler itself stores all the input information, the code, the theme, selection of default, and then theme variables, which is another configuration option that we haven't set yet. And just displays, using a simple macro, the Mermaid output, which is an SVG image of the output and a hyperlink to be able to access and edit the underlying code for the test1 tiddler. So if I move on and say I would have another project going on where I'm doing something different altogether, that is not, yeah, I remove the C and move back to B. I can use this edit feature here to load the test1 tiddler and diagram back into the Mermaid editor. It notes that there is an existing tiddler for test1 that will be overwritten, but from here I can edit the code and update it. Because this is a tiddler, it will follow all of the same rules and structures as tiddlers do already within TiddlyWiki. So you can transclude that tiddler, for example. I'll create a table with two cells side by side one another, one containing the transcluded diagram itself, and then you can have some notes on the diagram. And you can see that the diagram, the SVG file, is shrunk to fit into the width that was provided by the table cell. If we remove that style, you can see that it grows to its full size here. And the editing is available from both of these tiddlers at the same time. So again, this is just a transclusion from here. So if I want to go and edit this, I can pop this open. Again, it will bring the code from that tiddler here and offer me to save back to test1. And perhaps I want to add now another node onto the end. I can do that, update the file, save, and it will save not only this, but then in the transclusion, again, you will see the updated diagram. Within the editor, you can auto sync or not. So we have not been auto syncing and only syncing manually. Again, that is what prompts the code or the rendering to update based on the code. If you auto sync, then the render will attempt to match your code as you type it. So I've moved from a left-right flowchart to a top-down flowchart. But you can see if my syntax is breaking at any point, then my diagram will disappear. So perhaps you like having the see as you type. Perhaps having it flicker like this is not what you want. You can change that on or off with the auto sync. Another option would be to edit with the Mermaid Live Editor. So at any time, you can take the code that you're working on and open up the Mermaid Live Editor. That code, as well as your configuration options, here the default theme, will be brought over to Mermaid Live. And this is a nice place to make some edits as well, some nice syntax highlighting and formatting that you can do. Sometimes if there are issues with the underlying code, that will offer some options, some error and troubleshooting options. So lots to say positively about the Mermaid Live Editor. To solve for that issue that I highlighted before of needing to manage your code and your images and your configuration files, the plugin allows you to copy the URL. So I've done a copy, and then under the advanced editor, it gives you an option to load base64 output from the Mermaid Live. I'll load that back in here. It's smart enough to trim the URL portion off the front. It does validate the base64. So if you would remove that and have some invalid text, it will highlight to you and remove the option to load anything from there. So let's not do that. But this is the URL, and I can load that directly. And here you can see the edits that I made in the Live Editor are now brought back into my Mermaid editor in the plugin. And I can just very quickly and directly save that now to this tiddler. So if I wanted to open this up at any point as I'm working along, edit pops up in my Mermaid editor, go to Live Editor, change something in Live Editor, bring the URL back in, load it back and save it back. Again, hopefully this edit box here can cut out a little bit of that step in between if it's a simple and straight enough edit, but there are times when using the Live Editor might be worth it. I'd like to give a quick tour of some of the options for Mermaid charts. I'm going to turn on auto sync for all of this. I've been focusing on flowcharts so far, and I think that's one of the best developed diagram options, but there is a plethora, and that is part of the power of Mermaid.JS, and I think the value that this plugin can bring for bringing this into TiddlyWiki. So in addition to flowcharts, there are sequence diagrams, as you can see here, class diagrams. These example sets of code are all coming from the Mermaid documentation code base. So you can access that from the Mermaid Live Editor, and the diagram syntax for each of these is described in the documentation here. State diagram and entity relationship diagram. Customer journey map. Again, using a simple syntax that can be quickly and easily edited, allows you to maintain some pretty elaborate and very useful visualizations. Gantt chart. This is a pie chart. And I'm adding a lengthy requirements diagram. As you can see here, quite a lot of content, mapping all of these requirements and test elements to each other. In addition to just the power of all the different types of plots, there is a lot of support for theming and styling within the different diagrams. So in this flow chart, there have been classes defined, and those define green shapes or orange shapes. Some of the styling is applied, and then those classes are applied to certain shapes within the display, within the diagram. Additionally, because these are SVG, interactivity is possible. So I can not only select and interact with the content that's displayed here, but you can see I am able to add links. So when I click on the odd shape, it will bring me to google.com. And so you can include that within your diagrams as well. And again, all that is brought through with the SVGs, again, relying on the Mermaid service. Apart from the class definitions, I do want to show off the theme variables. So that's another, what I've added here below as an advanced option. I'm going to remove some of those specific classes. So here is the default theming. I'm going to add some theme variables. As noted here, these are essentially key value pairs using double quotes and not single quotes. I think the single quotes will also break in the Mermaid Live Editor, so this is just consistent with that. And comma separated. There is a little bit of trial and error that's involved in building any of these out. So you can see with the theme that was added, I've updated the line color, but I haven't overwritten the underlying colors from the default theme. If I move to the base theme, however, you can see that my primary color has updated. That's this teal. The secondary color and tertiary color. Secondary color is the white behind this line comment, and then the tertiary color being the gray that's back here. I've also updated the font family to a monospace. There are lots of other options at this reference site. And so you can find and play around with these, especially even very cloying color combinations. Again, it is a little bit of trial and error about what actually pops out when you render any given piece of content. So for example, with a journey map, I think the secondary color here is being used to render those boxes. That's true. But that works on the base, but now if I flip to default, it actually also works on the default. So whereas default overrode some default themes, for the flowchart, for the journey map diagram type, you can see that the theme variables take over. So there are a few interesting matters of consistency, and that all stems back again from the Mermaid rendering engine. Additionally, I'll highlight in some place, let me remove these theme variables. I have stumbled upon potentially some underlying issues with the rendering itself. So if this comes up as an aid to troubleshooting, you see here I've identified that there should be connections between A to D and B to D, and this appears to have just been cut off. I was really concerned about why my plugin was cutting off a portion of the content. So I opened it up in the Mermaid Live Editor and realized, oh, no, it's not actually my plugin. This is part of how it's actually getting rendered inside of Mermaid. So that's one of your troubleshooting options is to try and bring this information over to the Mermaid Live Editor and see if it's consistent there. And hopefully it is. And this indicates that the underlying issue is with Mermaid itself and not with this plugin. Alternatively, something that you can do as you, again, pursue trial and error through this would be to take these two options, A to D, B to D, and move them down to the bottom. What's interesting here is what renders is still logically consistent. All the different connections and pointers are where they need to be, but it is geometrically a very different shape than it was before. So that's just an interesting thing that happens when you're dealing with Mermaid, and you will see that as you go through the as you work with this plugin or with Mermaid just in general. So again, this is not specific to this plugin. Quick recap on some of the limitations. Again, this fully requires the internet even to display. So it's not simply about rendering the content, but without an internet connection, if you have saved a tiddler, this tiddler image will not itself display without an internet connection. So this goes out to the internet and grabs this SVG to display it, even without any of the code or rendering. And that's because this image is not stored as an image anywhere. It is rendered entirely. This Mermaid output macro calls the Mermaid engine on the internet and feeds all this information to it to make this display. Likewise, it is completely dependent on the Mermaid Live service for rendering images. So, of course, it's dependent on the underlying Mermaid.JS library, as we saw, which isn't always 100% perfect itself. But then furthermore, it relies on this mermaid.inc URL to actually do the rendering of images that are fed to it. So if there are network issues or Mermaid servers go down, then that would be a potential breakpoint as well. And last, within this plugin, I've tried to be generic, but have limited the information that's actually fed and what's stored with the tiddlers to just the code, theme, and theme variables information. So there is a little bit more that's defined within the Mermaid API, but I didn't see much practical use for it. If you do have use cases or feature requests, you can open an issue on the GitHub repo. All right, I'd like to quickly go over installation for those that are experienced with TiddlyWiki. This is not anything new, but for those that are not, I do want to be able to provide you a view of this. So what I have is the demo site, again, off of available on GitHub, and target wiki, sample wiki, that I would like to load this information into. So I will just drag and drop the link from the demo site directly into the TiddlyWiki and hit import. You'll see that you'll be able to read and access all the same content over here now in your new target wiki that you want. And then depending on how you have your wiki set up, you'll need to save and reload this information. So this does rely on a JavaScript module to do some of the encoding and pulling of information. And so that will require a full reload of the wiki. So you do need to save your sample wiki, and that is now saved locally. And I'm going to open up that new file. This is essentially the reload step. And I can see now within my sample wiki where I want to install Mermaid.JS, I will search for Mermaid Editor. Oh, I'm not finding it, but that is because the Mermaid Editor is part of the plugin. So let me show you. Under plugins, I have a lot of them here. We'll see edit and manage Mermaid.JS tiddlers. That's what I just saw before, and the Mermaid Editor is available. The issue is that the Mermaid Editor is actually a shadow tiddler because it is part of this plugin. So if you would like to make this accessible, I would recommend you link to it or otherwise sort of bookmark it so it's not immediately available from the search. Within advanced search, you can look under shadows and you'll find Mermaid Editor there, but it will not pop up immediately in the dropdown for you. And then from here, you can, again, define your diagrams. A few advanced topics that I'd like to discuss. The editor uses a temp file. So this can be observed. Let's open the editor. This can be seen Again, it's a system tiddler and it's under temp. Anything that happens in the Mermaid editor will feed into the different fields in this temp tiddler. This is just important to remember because if this temp tiddler is removed, and there are different processes that will remove tiddlers that are under a temp prefix, everything in the Mermaid editor will also get cleared out. So that is where things are held, and they're just copied over to saving tiddlers upon save. The structure of the macros may be of some import if you are, maybe even if you wanted to take this out of a shadow tiddler and recreate this elsewhere, that would actually be straightforward to do, because this tiddler is, it's going to ask me to edit a shadow tiddler. All this tiddler is doing is calling a Mermaid editor macro. So if I want my own Mermaid editor, I'll simply copy that content in, and voila, I have now my own Mermaid editor, which I can also now find because it is not a shadow. Word to the wise here, though, is as you can see, all of the content will be replicated across both of these, again, because they're both pointing just to that single temp for storing all of their information. The only macros that are exported are this one, the Mermaid editor for the editor, and then the Mermaid output, which goes into any tiddler that has the code theme and theme variables fields to display the diagram itself as well as the edit link. There are a number of other macros that are included, but those are only available internally, and so they're under macros internal. We'll see them listed out here. So this is not exported. I don't have the tags macro tag included here, whereas for macros, these two are globally exported. And so these two import these macros for their functionality, but they're all prefixed with Mermaid, so hopefully they're not interacting with or overwriting anything else that you have. But if you have maybe something else for some reason that has Mermaid in the text, this should keep your namespace clean from macros, from a macro perspective. So it's just those two macros that are actually exported. Additionally, there is a filter operator that's been added. This is Mermaid, and it requires a suffix. And this is really just sort of allowing me to use some JavaScript for some of the encoding, some of the parsing that needs to happen for the different functions of the tiddler. There really should be no reason for you to separately make use of the Mermaid values. But I will note that Mermaid encode is how base 64 content is encoded. If you're interested in the base 64 encoding or decoding, the best way to do it is not actually to use the Mermaid filter. And generally, these are not general purpose filters. They're not general purpose utilities. They're really strictly for use within the editor itself. If you are interested in the encoding, I copied a lot of that code out of a general utility, base 64 parsing. This is by Tobias Beer, if that is his last name. That's great. And so he has a very lightweight plugin that allows both encoding and decoding from base 64. So that is linked again in the notes. Thank you for watching. I hope you find this plugin useful and would love to hear of any comments or feedback you have on the GitHub repo.